Hello and welcome to Africa Today. I am Mike Okwache. The spotlight is on Africa as the 22nd Summit of Heads of State and Government of the African Union gains momentum in Ethiopia. The theme for this year's convention is transforming Africa's agriculture, harnessing opportunities for inclusive growth and sustainable development. Now, apart from issues of food security, the violent clashes in countries like the Central African Republic and South Sudan are among other issues that will feature prominently. Now, in another development, South Sudan's government and rebels have signed a ceasefire agreement after prolonged talks in Ethiopia. Under this agreement, the fighting is expected to end within 24 hours of signing the deal. What are your reactions to the South Sudan ceasefire agreement, and what other issues should be focal point at the AU summit in Ethiopia? Share your thoughts with us on Twitter at TVC Africa Today, or send an email to africatoday@tvcnews.tv. We'll take this report, and Africa Today will be right back. Welcome on board.
Efforts to broker ceasefire in the brunt of 5-week South Sudan conflict finally bore fruit on Thursday, after weeks of deadlock and which saw regional neighbors exert pressure on the two warring parties to end the hostilities. Now, the two agreements were signed here at Sheraton Hotel in Addis Ababa, which is just right behind me, and called for the ending of hostilities and the release of political detainees. Now, Juba has been holding 11 pro-Labour political figures on suspicion of attempting a coup attempt last month. Mediators from the region and the international community call upon the two parties to honor the agreement.
And we hope our brothers and sisters from South Sudan will demonstrate their commitment to the peace process and bring this negotiation to a successful conclusion. Excellencies, we in IGAD believe that the parties are dedicated to a nationwide healing process and building of trust and confidence in their people, who are making heavy prices in this deadly conflict. The two sides need to advance the implementation of these agreements through dialogue and reconciliation process and walk their talk for the sake of their people.
We acknowledge that the two parties were finally able to put their differences aside and to give priority to peace for their people, who have been suffering unnecessarily during the latest weeks of fighting. The world is supporting South Sudan and is expecting to see a prompt implementation of the agreement signed today.
Now, fresh reports of atrocities in war-torn South Sudan emerged early in the day as negotiators worked overtime to agree on a deal that will end the clashes that have rocked the young nation since mid-December. Thousands have been killed and 500,000 civilians forced to flee the fighting between troops loyal to President Salva Kiir and rebels allied to his sacked deputy Riek Machar. The UN says atrocities have been committed by both sides, including mass killings, sexual violence, and widespread destruction. Observers at the ceremony called upon the parties to accord the UN and other humanitarian organizations protection, even as they engage in the conflict. Stalled ceasefire talks in Ethiopia had caused anxiety as fighting spiraled into ethnic killings between members of Kil's Dinka people, which is the country's largest group, and Machar's Nuer. However, many still fear that the conflict has spun out of control. And as the agreements come into operation, the big question is, will the parties walk the talk? Ken Karori, TVC News, Addis Ababa.
Thank you very much for staying with us. The South Sudan ceasefire deal brings to an end violence that first flared 5 weeks ago after President Kiir accused his ex-deputy, Riek Machar, of planning a coup. Now, to discuss the trending issues on Africa Today, we have Clem Baye, the Chief Executive of Verity Communications. He's also a political analyst. It's good to have you join us today.
Good evening.
You're welcome.
Happy New Year.
Yeah, exactly. Happy New Year. And later on the show, on our second segment, we'll be linking up on film with Thomas Mounting, an international journalist in Eritrea. We'll be joined by Mohamed Bivogui of the International Fund for Agricultural Development from Italy as well. He'll be joining us in the other segment of the program. Now, let's start it this way from the ceasefire agreement. Africans are happy on one hand that eventually peace is returning to South Sudan, but in the first place, was the fight necessary?
Well, it's very optimistic to say peace is returning to Sudan. I think South Sudan. I think we should do that with a lot of prayer. All right.
Okay.
Now, the thing is that it was inevitable that there will be some crisis. And in my view, it had to do with the fact that it's not every guerrilla movement that does the transformation to being a political party very well. A classic case was Frelimo.
Okay.
Frelimo did try. It became a classic, and they were able to run a decent political system in Mozambique.
Exactly.
All right. Now, in the case of these people, about 91, there was some disagreement. And remember that the leading nationalist of South Sudan, John Garang, died, unfortunately, in a helicopter, in an air crash, I think a helicopter crash or something. It is believed that John Garang died. His death could be questionable because John Garang believed that rather than independence, what they needed was to restructure the federation, turn Sudan into a federation, and make it possible for him, a black non-Muslim, to be able to be president of a united Sudan. So that was what he was. That was his main preoccupation. But be that as it may, he's gone now. He's gone. Now, it's not enough for the elite to just meet and share power, which is precisely what Salva Kiir and his deputy did. And both of them are overly ambitious people. And dare I say, perhaps their political skills are, not that much. So that's why they kept having that problem. That has not been addressed. Ceasefire is very good. Let me be frank with you. It is good. But it should be the basis to involve the civil society, to involve the communal leaders in finding a way of restoring proper peace. Not just a truce, because to me, this is a truce, and already it's even been broken.
All right, but we have Thomas Banton on the line. But before we go to Thomas Banton, let me ask this. Is it becoming obvious that the founding fathers of South Sudan didn't really have a vision outlined for the country right from independence just about 2 years ago?
Yes, because I would dare say, with all due respects, that the gap in the leadership qualities of John Garang and the people that were left behind, there is a significant gap. Okay. And secondly, the Western powers that were backing South Sudan and the OAU, African Union rather, AU, should have made sure that a lot of things were done. South Sudan is a fledgling state. Remember, South Sudan is about 2/3 the size of Nigeria, and yet it has just 10 states. And as far as I know, they don't have up to 200 kilometers of paved road. So it's a dreadfully inadequate infrastructure that they have. So those things are serious challenges on their own. Now, when you have a leadership which, in my view, needs to improve its political skills, it is even more dreadful. The economy has a lot of potential because of the oil, and they are pastoralists, agriculture, and the rest of it. It has enough to be able to feed itself if it can get its infrastructure right. But then the politics has to be resolved first.
Okay. Now, joining us on phone from Eritrea is Thomas Banton. Thomas Banton, it's good to have you join us. Welcome to Africa Today. Now, what do you make of the ceasefire agreement for South Sudan? Do you think this is going to last?
I think it's sort of a little bit too late, too little, too late. The situation, what a lot of people don't realize is that the only beneficiary of this whole war in South Sudan has been the USA. The USA has determined that that its national interest in the United States is to deprive China of the access to Africa's oil fields, and now China has been once again kicked out of the Sudanese oil field. This is the only Chinese majority-owned oil field operation in Africa, and China's been kicked out again. So this is the only one that's really benefiting by all this is the United States. Now, the question is, what role is the United States playing in South Sudan? Well, we know from WikiLeaks that since 2009, the United States, via the CIA, has been paying the salary of the South Sudanese army. In other words, the soldiers, the rebels fighting for Riek Machar and the soldiers fighting for President Salva Kiir are both having their salaries paid by the CIA. In other words, the United States is paying the Sudanese army to kill each other. And how come the Western media is not talking about this? So now there's a ceasefire, but the damage has been done. The oil fields are destroyed. The situation is now, South Sudan has no income. They're hurting the North Sudan. The Sudan itself is going to be destabilized. The United States would like to see President al-Bashir's government kicked out of power. So, and that's, by cutting off their oil supplies, this is going to destabilize Sudan itself. So the ceasefire is just a little, too little, too late, is my opinion.
All right. Now, African leaders are holding a summit in Ethiopia. What can they do to ensure political stability in South Sudan precisely?
Well, as long as the United States, the CIA, is paying the salaries of both sides in this conflict, how are you going to ensure any stability? I mean, this is not something I made up. This is something we find out from the secrets released by WikiLeaks, that the CIA has been paying these guys salaries. So that's a question that's got to be asked: is why is the United States why is the United States involved in all this? And what are the dirty tricks are they up to? So even the African Union is not an independent organization. It's basically a tool of the United States and the Western government. I mean, African Union, most of all their bills are being paid by the U.S. and the Western government. If they're paying your bills, that you got to, if the master whistles, you got to dance, and that's what's been going on. So I don't have a whole lot of hope for what's going on there, even though Salva Kiir and Omar al-Bashir have sat down and said, listen, we got to stabilize the situation. But again, who's paying the expenses of Riek Machar's rebel army? Who's paying for their gasoline that they use for their equipment? Who's paying for their ammunition? Who's paying for the food they're using? The country's completely destroyed. Even if Riek Machar is using money he stole, we know he stole something like $2 billion from Sudan. What bank is it in? How is he accessing these funds? If they want to cut off the conflict, they have to cut off the supply of money and ammunition going to Riek Machar's army.
All right, Thomas, thank you very much. We're glad to get your opinion on the program, even though it seemed like we didn't really get each other correctly, but maybe you didn't get my questions correctly. But however, we got your opinion. It was wonderful. Thank you very much, Thomas Martin from Eritrea. Now, during the fighting in South Sudan, there were some atrocities that were actually committed.
Sure.
Is there going to be punishment for anything like that?
Precisely, that is the issue. The justice system as it is now is still fledgling. It's not developed yet. So you either have impunity on both sides, and which is no good, or you have excessive oppression on the part of the winners. I mean, the winners. The winner takes all syndrome. You're going to make sure that they really crush this. I keep emphasizing the fact of the low level of political skills of the two main actors. The president dissolved his cabinet spectacularly because he wanted to get the vice president out. And both of them are very ambitious. Now, you see, as Western media will talk about the Dinka, the Nua, well, it is true that between them, they are like about 40%, the Dinka about 32, 33%, and the other one 10 to 13%. Now, but the challenge really is the fact that in the bid for independence, as I said, the people were not thoroughly prepared. The institutions of governance are not there yet. I mean, they're there there's a parliament. There's a parliament, but really, and then the corruption is atrocious. The level of corruption there is atrocious. So time they would have spent attending to these issues, making sure they run a clean state. They spend that time jockeying for positions so that they can. It's always good at that point to appeal to your ethnic and primordial sentiments. But really, it is nothing to do about those issues. I admit that historically, there were issues about cattle rustling and the rest of it. Historically, it's also been there. But it's not the main issue. The main issue is that they were not adequately prepared.
All right. So as we're going to round off this segment now, but what do you think should be the focal point for the president and his ex-vice president now in championing a new course for the country?
It will be very difficult for the two of them to work together. I do not see how those two stubborn people can work together. But I think that the AU still has a role to play.
Okay.
And the AU's role should be that, listen, we need more nodal points, not just these two. We need to bring in a lot more people. Okay. We involve a lot of people in the reconciliation process. Right. It's not going to benefit anybody if South Sudan is a failure. Right. And I keep saying it, that when we think that once we say you secede, that your problem is over, this is the proof that the problem
All
just
right,
started.
thank you. Now, it took mediators from the Intergovernmental Authority on Development to intervene in South Sudan. Now, with the latest peace agreement, more than 500,000 people who have been forced to flee their homes can now heave a sigh of relief and possibly go back to their communities and homes. We'll go on a quick break in Africa Today. We'll be right back. Stay with us. And when we come back, certainly we'll be looking at agriculture in Africa. Right, the 22nd ordinary session of the African Union in Ethiopia is where heads of state will launch the year 2014 as the Year of Agriculture and Food Security. Now, this marks the 10th anniversary of the Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program. Welcome to the second segment. Now, let's talk about agriculture in Africa. Now, the point there is Africa has the largest arable lands, as the case may be, natural, everything, wonderful vegetation and so on. But you seem to be the continent with the highest amount of insecurity when it comes to food. Why this paradox? Exactly.
Yeah. It has to do with the policies that were enunciated. It has to do with the land tenure system. It has to do with the type of economies that we were running. And it has to do with the type of leadership that we've had all over these years. When you look at it, very critically, most countries will regard food security as next to oxygen security, if there's anything like oxygen security. The U.S. regards food security as very important. The U.S. will waste food if they will make sure that they can secure their food supplies. Now, we didn't pay so much attention to this at continental level. Be that as it may, 10 years ago, there was this focus on it, which is commendable. And looking at the value chains, looking at the infrastructure that goes with it. When you're talking in terms of even the land tenure, you're looking at even water management, grazing rights. Look at much of the crisis that is happening in the Middle Belt area. If you look at it in Benue, in Plateau, in southern Kaduna.
That's in Nigeria.
In Nigeria, in our country, has a lot to do with grazing rights. The Fulani, setting their cattle loose on people's farmlands, and then it causes rifts between people, and a lot of it has been very bloody. So these things have not been addressed. So it is high time we started looking at those things about land tenure and the rest of them.
Okay, yeah. We'll come back to this. We have Mohamed Bivugui online with us from Italy. Now, Mohamed, it's good to have you on Africa Today. Welcome. Now, what is wrong with Africa in terms of agricultural policies and practice?
If you look at all the programs of political parties in Africa, you will find that agriculture is put as first priority. So, being parties in power or parties in opposition. So therefore, there is a general conscience that agriculture must be a priority for Africa. Now, most of the governments are actually trying to develop the proper policies. The issue is the implementation of those policies. For example, one of the most important is related to the land policy. The land policies are not so far right. And you all know that if you want to have a commercial agriculture, even if it is for the smallholder, you need to have the issue of land rights.
Absolutely.
Remember that despite the fact that the majority of our farmers are smallholder farmers,
Okay.
agriculture, to be properly managed, must stop being subsistence agriculture, because subsistence agriculture is badly managed agriculture. We need to turn our small farmers into businesses. And the first condition is proper land policy. In addition to that, you need to have policies that allow our farmers to have access to what they need, the main inputs. Number one, good seeds. Then good fertilizer at a proper price, closer to his farm. You need to have good advisory services, technologies. And you need to have them be able to control water. That means good irrigation. Okay? And you need them to be able to access the market. That means roads, simply roads.
All right, Mohammed. All right, Mohammed, let me ask you this. Let me ask you this. How can agriculture benefit from the wealth of oil?
Well, I think agriculture could really benefit from the wealth of oil directly and indirectly. And directly, number one, is that oil, is one of the sources to manufacture fertilizer. So therefore, you can already encourage the production of transforming part of that oil so you can have direct access to fertilizer in the country. Number one. Number two, to have an agriculture that is viable, you need a good infrastructure. So the oil should be used to invest in infrastructure that is useful to agriculture. You see, the problem is that frequently oil is used to invest in infrastructure that don't take care of agriculture. For example, cities are more beautiful. We build roads, but we don't ask ourselves if that road is going through a farming area.
Sure.
And once we have done that road, we don't connect that road to the villages, to the farms, in order for them to be able to connect the main highway so they can take their production out. It is valid for electricity, it is valid for water. So if we want agriculture to be developed thanks to oil, we need to invest into infrastructure first, thanks to the oil oil revenues, and we need also to use those revenues to train people.
All right. Thank you very much, Mohammed. Thank you, Mohammed. That's how much time can permit us today. Thank you very much for your contributions on Africa Today. Thank you. All right. Now, let me ask this before we go. Like Mohammed was saying, there are beautiful policies, programs, projects lined up on white paper for agriculture, for the people, villages, urban areas, and so on. But how can all this be translated and transformed into practical, executable, tangible programs on the ground for farmers and even the people generally in Africa?
Yeah, first of all, we've got to get all the farmers a buy-in. You see, there is a disconnect because most people, when they hear government policies, they just say, oh, another exclamation mark. Nothing is going to come out of this. Secondly, there's something the African Union is doing, which one should commend through the NEPAD, is this particular policy of comprehensive agricultural development since 10 years now. This is the 10th year, and this year they're focusing on it. It's good to focus on things like that. Years ago, when it was the African Union, it didn't have time for things like that. It always had to do with who is in power and who is likely to be toppled the following day. So they did not have time. So about time we were developing, giving priority to agricultural development. Second, thirdly, we ought to see what sort of linkages are available. And especially, as your correspondent said, your contributor said, look, We have basically smallholder farms. But if these farms are regarded as economic entities, if the land is surveyed and you have a certificate of occupancy, as we say in Nigeria, you can now use it to go and borrow money. But a lot of these holdings are so small, and the process of trying to get certificate of occupancy is...
Yeah, and even sometimes the lands are owned by ancestral, tribal...
Yes, at times
ethnic,
communal.
Tribal, exactly,
at times communal.
Tribal,
and as the land keeps being split, it's a complete change in the model that we are practicing. Right. But let's not forget that the smallest country is New Zealand, is a superpower in terms of lamb production. Brazil is a huge country, and it's a major food exporter after the United States.
It's all right. Thank you very much for coming on the program today and sharing your thoughts with us.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
And we also thank Thomas for contributing earlier on, and Mohammed as well. Now, statistics show that 1 in every 4 persons in Africa lack adequate food for a healthy life. High food prices, drought and violence are pushing more people into poverty and hunger. And South Sudan, the world's youngest nation, on the other hand, is an example of a place where weeks of violence left many without a place to stay, for food to eat as well. Now, Africa has a lot of potentials for growth, and peace is all it takes to attain the continent of our dreams. That's our show for today. Watch our previous episodes of the show online at www.youtube.com/TVC Africa Today. And until we come your way again, I am Mike Okwoche. Remember, this is Africa. Bye for now.